Welcome everybody, share number 635. We're learning today Le'ila Nishmas Moshe Dov Ben Rabban Zisel, Le'ila Nishmas Blima Bas Rab Moshe, and that Yitzchak Yosef Ben Mary Malka should be Malchzul Shuva. Getting back to our malacha of TOFAIR sewing. So today I'd like to start talking about a totally different part of TOFAIR sewing. Till now we've been talking about a thread, a needle, possibly pulling the thread, and the various different types of openings that the thread is going through, using a safety pin or the like. But there's another whole aspect to sewing TOFAIR, which applies very often and could apply sometimes on a weekly basis, and that is the Indian of gluing and taping. And this is obviously we could understand. When it comes to gluing and taping, now we're not talking about tearing the tape, we're talking about the actual sticky part gluing it together. For example, pieces of paper gluing together, adhesive notes, postage stamps. Most of us are not using postage stamps. Sometimes it comes up in an album. You have pictures, stickers on clothing, using stickers all together. Also, we want to try and talk a little bit about stapling, if two items were stapled together, is there an issue with that? Band-aids, putting on a Band-aid, as we could understand sometimes on diapers. A lot of times, diapers today basically, I think, are Velcro, but many times years ago, for sure, not too far back, we used to have diapers was with a sticky band, with a sticky tape on it. Okay, so of course the first question is, what does gluing and taping and sticking items together have to do with sewing? Sewing is a thread and needle sticking two items together. What does that have to do with sewing? So tells us the Shulchan Aruch, again in our Siman Shin Mem Sif Yadalid B'Shem the Rambam, very famous Rambam in Shabbos. So he says like this: Hamadabik niyaros. If somebody glues together, they glue together, attach together through glue and tape or whatever the case is. These are all basically it's the same family. Hamadabik niyaros, they glue together paper or oiros or some sort of skins. B'koilin shal soifrim, with a glue of people who used to write, scribes and the like. Anything similar, tape or the like. So says the Rambam, brought down the Shulchan Aruch, harezeh toiledes TOFAIR. This is taka a toilda of the malacha of TOFAIR sewing v'chayev, and one would be chayev for doing so. And he finishes off. He says further actually v'chein hamafarik niyaris. Also, if one would take apart the two papers that were glued together in such a way, or two skins or the like. In those days, we want to keep in mind why we're saying paper and skins. What does one have to do with the other? Nowadays, we only know paper. In those days, they used to use a lot of skins, way back when. So obviously today we don't deal with that type of stuff in general, but the paper part definitely does apply. So if somebody takes it apart, and they don't have a mind to destroy it, to destroy it alone, this would be the malacha of kareya, of tearing, and one would be chayiv. So just real quickly to explain what is kareya, TOFAIR, what's the story? As we explained in the beginning, that we're talking about when we talk about koshair, the tying, umatir, untying. We also have TOFAIR sewing, and in conjunction with that, running basically parallel, TOFAIR is the sewing part, kareya is the tearing part. But of course, we have to go through all the various different categories of kareya and the foundation and what it's all about. But we see over here, to start, very simply, somebody glues together two pieces of paper. It could be running into a problem of TOFAIR, again, sewing the way, depending on the way it was done, which of course we'll explain. And if somebody pulls those two pieces of paper that were glued together apart, could be possibly running into the toilda of kareya, tearing. Now, I just want to explain one thing so we have a better understanding as we talk. We're not talking about kareya, tearing right now, but we all know, most of us know kareya as I take a piece of paper and I tear it. Or maybe I open a package on Shabbos, or maybe I tear an ice cream pop, you know what I mean? Or I tear open a potato chip bag. So all these things we know as tearing. But the real tearing that we're going to be talking about when we get to the malacha of kareya, which obviously is in conjunction with TOFAIR, right after TOFAIR, Bezras Hashem, it's sort of like a brother and sister, but the tearing part is really taking apart, is the opposite of TOFAIR. When you sew together 3 stitches and something is, the two pieces of material, as we know by now, TOFAIR sewn together with 3 stitches or 2 stitches when it's tied at the ends of the thread. Taking that apart, so putting it together is TOFAIR sewing. Taking it apart, removing the stitching from the hem, from the cuff, from the seam, whatever it might be, removing that and taking the 2 pieces of material apart is called koshair. Putting the 2 pieces of material together through a sewing process is TOFAIR sewing, and taking it apart, the cuff, hem, seam, whatever it is the malacha of koshair sewing. So koshair, tearing. So TOFAIR sewing, putting it together, koshair, tearing, taking it apart. Now, it does also apply, like we know, tearing paper and so on. But again, we're going to see all those halachas when we get to it. But let's just keep in mind that the same way that TOFAIR sewing is putting together, koshair is just the opposite. So anything that we say that's also to put together in general through TOFAIR sewing, we're going to say the opposite is also to take apart through koshair tearing. The only thing is, by koshair, sometimes it might be a little bit easier, which of course we're going to see, because of the fact that for koshair, it has to be koshair al manas l'sakin. It has to be tearing in order for a constructive purpose, for it to be osir min haTorah, whereby TOFAIR is a constructive malacha, so just doing the actual sewing, one will be chayiv. For koshair, it's a destructive malacha, so therefore we are going to need a constructive purpose, which we're going to see. It's also part of the other malachas of boina and soisa, building and destroying. By destroying, just to destroy something, it's a d'rabbanan, it's makalkel, but in order to be chayiv for destroying, one would have to be doing it in order to rebuild. Okay, but again, let's not get too complicated, one step at a time. So back to our subject, that putting pieces of paper, gluing them, taping together, we see is running into a problem of TOFAIR sewing. So now the question comes up, why is gluing? We saw the Rambam says it, and the Mechaber brings it down. We understand. Shulchan Aruch says you can't glue items, you can't tape items, and so on. But what does that have to do? We still don't know. What does that have to do with sewing? So interesting. It explains to us the Sefer Shabbos Home on page 72 that since the malacha of sewing, what do we know? The malacha of sewing is defined as uniting 2 items together. 2 items, we make them into one. So therefore, it's going to apply. We know it's by sewing, stitching it up, 2 items now become one. So the same thing would apply to pasting it. And taka, pasting, gluing. When we say pasting, gluing, it's all taping. It's all the same. It's all the same family, the same thing. And the truth is, like I've mentioned many times, we used to be in the dry cleaning industry, and I don't know how much they do it today, but I do remember way back when we used to have a tailor, Oliver Shalom, that taka many years ago, that sometimes if he was rushing, usually to sew up a pair of cuffs or a hem, really very strong, or the right way, I don't know if you want to say the right way, but is to sew it together, right? To stitch it together. But sometimes it takes a long time. So many times there were tailors that were a little bit in a rush, and they would tape it together. They had this type of a tape where they would take the hem or the cuff in a professional way, of course, and it would last. They would tape it together and tape up the hem, and it would taka last, and it would be good for the person, and that's all. The only problem with that was when they had to open it up or clean it out and to redo it, whatever the case is, that it changed the hem. So then it became a little bit of a problem. It was a little bit of a pachkaraya, as they say, because you could imagine the glue became flaky and so on. But there was such a professional way of making cuffs, sewing up hems, something, stuff along those lines, and they would put in this type of it was like a glue, like an adhesive type of a tape. They would put it in and very simply close up the cuff or close up the hem, and it would last, and it would last in dry cleaning, and it was made to last, that the person would have a regular hem. Instead of using the stitching, they would use this gluing process or the adhesive tape process, and that's how they put together, various types of clothing, or they fix certain clothing with hems and cuffs and so on. So we see that the gluing process is taka, the gluing, taping, and so on is taka, a way of uniting 2 items, making it into one, even in a professional way, as far as being a tailor and so on. So that's basically what the reasoning is behind that. When we say that when the Rambam says, when the Mechaber says, Tafioris, you glue together two pieces of paper, two skins or the like, or two garments, and in general, not doing garments on Shabbos, but two pieces of paper, one is running into a problem of TOFAIR sewing. Now, of course, we're going to see there's various different ways, different types. It depends what you're taking off. It depends what you're putting on, for how long, with a kiyum, without a kiyum. Okay, we have to see a little bit more, obviously, into the subject. But just to get it all started, we see there is such a problem depending on the situation. And the reason, like we said, because of the fact that the bottom line is you're uniting two items together through a gluing process, through a taping process, and so on. And that is the malach of TOFAIR. Okay, we're going to go further and, of course, start to explain many more details, when it would apply, when it will not apply, in the upcoming shiur. Thank you for listening. Hatzlacha and bracha, kol tov.